Now, two leaders of the far-right English Defence League have decided to leave the organisation, saying they can no longer keep extremist elements of the group under control. Tommy Robinson and Kevin Carroll set up the English Defence League, the EDL, back in 2009 and have been involved in a number of street protests which have turned violent. Well, let's get more on this with our Home Affairs correspondent, Mark White. Can no longer keep extremist elements under control. That's a bit chilling.
Yeah, I think this is very significant because essentially you've got the founders of a group that, not only by their own admission, but by their own design, was meant to counter radical Islam by being fairly radical and vociferous in its outlook as well, and the way it would operate. Now saying that it's reached such an extent in terms of the violent nature of some elements within that group, that they have no choice but to leave the EDL. Now, I understand, Dermot, it's not just these two individuals, but a dozen members of the EDL leadership that have decided they've had enough of this organisation and they've stepped aside. So where that now leaves the EDL, we don't know, but certainly it's very worrying, this suggestion, as they say, that it is being increasingly taken over by radical elements which they can no longer keep at bay.
And what about Robinson and Carroll? What do they say they're going to do?
Well, another sort of very unusual more bizarre element of this story is that now Tommy Robinson has aligned himself with a Muslim group. This Muslim group is the Quilliam Foundation. It was set up to put over a more moderate Islamic voice, again to counter radical Islam in the wake of the likes of the London bombings. They have managed, apparently, to win Tommy Robinson over. He is going to join their cause to try to get the message across. They say that there is a sort of commonality of purpose here, in that the Quilliam Foundation is trying to counter extremism. Tommy Robinson now says he is trying to counter extremism as well, not just radical Islam, but acknowledging that there is very radical elements now within the EDL. So they've come together with a common purpose. They'll be holding a news conference, actually, later on this afternoon, which should be pretty unmissable, I think.
Yeah, extraordinary. I mean, what about the rump of the EDL? Quite often with organisations that splinter like this, well, then you say the entire leadership seems to have gone. They're worried about the extremist elements. Well, the extremist elements then presumably are left to their own devices now. There must be concerns amongst the authorities.
I think there will be great concern at that. We've seen a progression in the way that the EDL has operated in recent years. It was set up in 2009 in Luton by Kevin Carroll and Tommy Robinson to counter these demonstrations that were taking place for returning British soldiers. It was meant to counter those protests, but the way in which those counter-protests have manifested themselves in recent years has become increasingly violent. And while Tommy Robinson acknowledges there was a purpose in protesting at the outset, the violent nature now of these protests is something he no longer wants anything to do with. Effectively now, anytime the EDL turn out to any kind of a protest, then you get counter groups coming to protest against the EDL, and there are always clashes, always arrests. It's something that worries the police, and now obviously Tommy Robinson has acknowledged it is a big problem.
OK, Mark, thank you for explaining that to us. Mark White there.